Fear, haste, and failure of duty sometimes turn ordinary encounters into irreversible loss. In this video, we're telling the stories of 5 lives that ended where safety should have begun, in the hands of those sworn to protect. Join us as we explore the tragedies behind badges, broken trust, and the haunting question of how it all went so wrong. On January 7, 2023, 29-year-old Tyra Nichols was driving home through Memphis, Tennessee, when a traffic stop by police would alter the course of countless lives. Tyra was known among his loved ones as gentle and creative. Yet that winter night, less than 2 minutes from his home, he encountered officers from a specialized Memphis Police Department unit whose tactics would soon shock the nation. Tyra Nichols had moved to Memphis from Sacramento in 2020, seeking stability and a new beginning. His family spoke of his struggles with Crohn's disease, which had left him lean and physically vulnerable, but he maintained an active life, often taking photos of sunsets and skateboarding. His mother, Rovon Wells, lived nearby, and he often returned home after work to share meals with her. On the evening of January 7th, the officers who stopped him were members of the Scorpion Unit, a 30-person team formed to combat violent crime in the city. Among the 5 officers who stopped him were Demetrius Haley, 30, Emmett Martin III, 30, Desmond Mills Jr., 32, Justin Smith, 28, and Tadarius Bean, 24. All were young, with only a few years of experience, and several had prior disciplinary actions. The encounter began when Nichols was stopped near the intersection of East Rains Road and Ross Road for alleged reckless driving. Body camera and pole-mounted surveillance footage later revealed that the justification for the stop could not be substantiated. The officers surrounded his car on 3 sides before Haley yanked him from the driver's seat while shouting conflicting commands. Nichols repeatedly stated he had done nothing wrong. Within moments, he was on the ground, pepper sprayed by multiple officers who were simultaneously shouting contradictory orders. Overwhelmed, he managed to break free and ran toward his mother's home less than a mile away. The chase continued through the neighborhood until officers caught up with him on Castlegate Lane. The footage released weeks later would reveal the next 3 minutes as some of the most disturbing ever captured by police cameras. A stationary CCTV camera showed officers kicking Nichols in the upper body, punching him in the face, and striking him with a baton as he called out for his mother. Despite being restrained, he was repeatedly beaten by officers who appeared to coordinate the attack. Nichols did not fight back. At one point, one officer could be heard threatening to baton him moments before striking him again. When the beating ended, Nichols was handcuffed and left slumped against a police vehicle, unresponsive. Medical assistance was slow to arrive. Paramedics reached the scene at 8:41 p.m., but according to reports, they did not begin administering aid for another 16 minutes. Nichols was later transported to St. Francis Hospital, where he was admitted in critical condition. He died 3 days later, on January 10, 2023. The autopsy confirmed he had suffered extensive blunt force trauma to the head and body, multiple contusions and hemorrhages, and brain and liver damage. In the days that followed, official accounts began to unravel. Police reports initially claimed that Nichols had been irate and resisted arrest, but video evidence contradicted nearly every statement. There was no proof of reckless driving or violent resistance. The Memphis police chief later confirmed that her department found no probable cause for the initial stop. What emerged instead was a portrait of systemic misconduct and failure, from the officer's brutal actions to the medic's delay and the supervisor's inaction. Lieutenant Dwayne Smith, who oversaw the scene, later retired before disciplinary action could be taken. Public outrage grew swiftly. When the city of Memphis released 4 edited clips of the footage on January 27th, protests erupted nationwide. Demonstrators gathered under banners calling for accountability and reform, while Nichols' family demanded justice. The 5 Scorpion officers were fired and charged with second-degree murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and official misconduct. Federal prosecutors later charged them with civil rights violations, obstruction, and witness tampering. Some officers, including Desmond Mills Jr. and Emmett Martin III, eventually pleaded guilty to state and federal charges, agreeing to cooperate with authorities. Others, including Demetrius Haley, faced convictions on multiple counts, though several were later acquitted of state charges in 2025. The fallout extended beyond the individuals involved. The Scorpion unit was permanently disbanded on January 28, 2023, and the Memphis Fire Department terminated 3 employees for failing to assist Nichols. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation, while Nichols' family filed a $550 million lawsuit against the city, the police department, and the officers involved. The civil lawsuit is scheduled to go to trial in July 2026. The footage of Tyre Nichols' final moments, captured by both police body cameras and surveillance, exposed not only the individual cruelty of those officers, but also the institutional culture that allowed such violence to flourish unchecked. Tyre Nichols had been 2 minutes from home, calling out for the mother who waited inside, unaware of her son's desperate pleas. In the still cold hours of February 4, 1999, the Bronx was quiet. On Wheeler Avenue, a 23-year-old Guinean immigrant named Amadou Diallo stood outside his apartment building, unaware that in moments his life would end. Amadou had come to New York to chase opportunity, but his name would instead become a lasting symbol of injustice and the deadly consequences of mistaken identity. Amadou Diallo was born on September 2, 1975 in Liberia, to Saiko and Kadiatou Diallo, members of a respected Fulbe trading family from Guinea. He spent his childhood moving across West Africa and Asia, studying in Thailand and Singapore before joining relatives in New York in 1996. Independent and determined, he sold gloves, socks, and tapes on 14th Street to save money for college, telling his mother just days before his death that he had raised $9,000 for tuition. Those who knew him described him as humble, kind, and ambitious, a young man who believed in the promise of America and wanted to succeed through hard work. In the late 1990s, the NYPD's Street Crime Unit, created to combat violent crime under Mayor Rudy Giuliani, operated in plain clothes and was known for its motto, "We own the night." Officers Sean Carroll, Edward McMillan, Kenneth Boss, and Richard Murphy were part of that elite but controversial group. That night, they had been patrolling the Bronx, searching for the suspect of multiple crimes, when they spotted Amadou standing in his building's doorway shortly after midnight. According to their accounts, Amadou appeared suspicious, glancing up and down the street. The officers stopped their unmarked car and approached to question him. When they ordered him to show his hands, he reached into his pocket to retrieve his wallet. Officer Carroll, believing he was reaching for a gun, shouted, "Gun!" and opened fire. The recoil from his weapon caused him to stumble, and in the confusion, the other 3 officers began shooting as well. Within seconds, 41 bullets were fired. 19 struck Amadou. He fell in the doorway, unarmed, his wallet still in his hand. Eyewitnesses later said that the officers continued to shoot even as Amadou collapsed. None of the 4 men found a weapon. What lay beside him was a wallet and a beeper. Officer Carroll reportedly cried out in shock, realizing what had happened. The investigation that followed confirmed that Amadou had no criminal record, no weapon, and had made no threatening move beyond reaching into his pocket. Tens of thousands took to the streets in protest. Demonstrators carried wallets and signs reading, "This is not a gun." Civil rights leaders, politicians, and celebrities were arrested outside police headquarters. Amadou's parents flew from Guinea to New York to mourn their son and demand justice. In March 1999, a grand jury indicted the 4 officers on charges of second-degree murder and reckless endangerment. Because of extensive media coverage, the trial was moved from the Bronx to Albany. In February 2000, after 3 days of deliberation, a jury of 12 acquitted all 4 officers of every charge. The verdict sparked outrage across the country. Former New York Mayor David Dinkins warned that the decision would send the wrong message to police who already acted with impunity. Amadou's father called the verdict the second killing of his son. In 2002, the Street Crime Unit was disbanded. In 2004, Amadou's family received a $3 million settlement in a wrongful death suit against New York City, the largest of its kind for an unmarried man without dependents. His mother went on to create the Amadou Diallo Foundation, dedicated to supporting young students and promoting racial equality through education. Amadou Diallo's death remains one of the most painful examples of fatal police error in American history. On the morning of April 12, 2015, in the Gilmore Homes housing projects of West Baltimore, 25-year-old Freddie Carlos Gray Jr. crossed paths with police officers on patrol. Within minutes, he was in custody. Within a week, he would be dead. What began as a brief encounter between a young man and a group of officers escalated into one of the most disturbing deaths ever caused by the very people meant to protect the public, exposing deep fractures between law enforcement and the community they served. Freddie Gray was born into hardship. Premature and underweight, he had been exposed to illegal substances in the womb and suffered lead poisoning as a child. He grew up in poverty, attended special education classes, and struggled with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In 2015, he lived with his sisters, Frederica and Carolina, in the same Gilmore Homes complex where he would later encounter police. The officers involved in the arrest were veterans of the Baltimore Police Department: Lieutenant Brian Rice, Sergeant Alicia White, Officers William Porter, Edward Nero, Garrett Miller, and van driver Caesar Goodson. Most had served for years without major disciplinary action, though Rice's record was marred by complaints and prior behavioral issues. That morning, Rice, Nero, and Miller were patrolling the neighborhood on bicycles. When Freddie made eye contact with them, he ran without having committed any crime. The officers chased, caught, and detained him after finding a folding knife that was later determined to be legal under Maryland law. Witnesses described what followed as brutal. Videos recorded by bystanders showed Freddie screaming as officers dragged him toward the transport van, his legs bent awkwardly behind him. One officer appeared to press a knee into his neck while others lifted him by his arms. Freddie cried out that he couldn't breathe and couldn't use his legs, but his pleas were ignored. He was loaded into the van, handcuffed and shackled, but not seatbelted, a direct violation of a department policy introduced just 6 days earlier to prevent in-custody injuries. During the 45-minute journey to the Western District Police Station, the van made multiple stops. At one, officers placed additional restraints on Freddie. At another, they added a second prisoner. At no point was he given medical attention, despite his repeated requests for help. By the time the van arrived at its final destination, Freddie was unresponsive. Paramedics found him not breathing, and he was rushed to the University of Maryland's R. Adams Cowley Shock Trauma Center, where doctors discovered his spinal cord was 80% severed at the neck, an injury consistent with a high-impact trauma. Freddie remained in a coma for a week, but he never regained consciousness. He died on April 19, 2015. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide, citing the officers' failure to secure him in the van and their disregard for his repeated cries for help. Baltimore Police Commissioner Anthony Batts admitted that officers had neglected to follow procedure and failed to provide timely medical care. Protests began peacefully but soon escalated into violent confrontations. Buildings burned, businesses were looted, and dozens were arrested. 15 officers were injured. The National Guard was deployed, a curfew was imposed, and Baltimore descended into a state of emergency. Freddie's death had become a national symbol of police misconduct and the deep mistrust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby filed criminal charges against all 6 officers, ranging from second-degree depraved heart murder to manslaughter and misconduct. The van driver, Caesar Goodson, faced the most serious charge, accused of showing extreme indifference to human life. Despite the widespread outrage, each case ended without conviction. William Porter's trial resulted in a mistrial, while Nero, Goodson, and Rice were acquitted. Charges against White and Miller were dropped. The Department of Justice launched a sweeping investigation into the Baltimore Police Department, citing patterns of excessive force and racial discrimination. Yet in 2017, federal prosecutors announced they would not pursue charges against any of the 6 officers. Internally, some faced administrative hearings or minor disciplinary actions, but none lost their positions permanently. For Freddie's family, the outcome was devastating. His twin sister, Frederica, later described feeling as though half of you is gone. Their attorney, Billy Murphy, secured a $6.4 million civil settlement with the city, a financial acknowledgement of wrongdoing that could never compensate for the life lost. On the morning of April 4, 2015, in North Charleston, South Carolina, 50-year-old Walter Scott, a black father of 4, began his day unaware that it would end in tragedy. What began as a routine traffic stop for a broken brake light turned into a fatal encounter that exposed deep flaws in policing and accountability. Walter Scott had lived an ordinary life. A former U.S. Coast Guard member and forklift operator, he was studying massage therapy while rebuilding stability after financial struggles. He had an outstanding warrant for missed child support payments, a crucial and fatal detail. Friends described him as gentle and soft-spoken, someone who worked hard despite past difficulties. Michael Slager, 33, a North Charleston police officer, had served 5 years on the force. Before that, he had spent time in the Coast Guard. His record was mostly clean, though prior complaints about excessive force had gone largely unexamined. On that April morning, Slager was patrolling alone when he noticed Walter's 1991 Mercedes with a broken brake light and pulled him over on Remount Road. The stop began calmly. Dashcam footage later showed the 2 men talking briefly before Slager returned to his car to run Walter's information. Moments later, Walter suddenly opened his door and ran. He likely feared arrest over the outstanding warrant, something that had previously landed him in jail. Slager gave chase through a vacant lot behind a pawn shop. He fired his taser, striking Walter, but Walter broke free and started running again. In those next seconds, a bystander named Faden Santana began filming. His cell phone captured Slager drawing his service weapon and firing 8 shots at Walter's back as he fled. 5 bullets struck him, 3 in the back, 1 in the buttocks, and 1 near the ear. Walter collapsed face down on the grass, unarmed. Instead of offering aid, Slager handcuffed Walter's lifeless body. Moments later, he walked back to where the struggle had occurred, picked up his taser, and dropped it near Walter. In his initial report, Slager claimed Walter had taken the taser and posed a threat, but Santana's video, released days later, revealed the truth. Walter had been running away when he was shot. The footage changed everything. Soon after it surfaced, Slager was charged with Scott's death and later fired. The video spread across the world, symbolizing yet another instance of deadly force against an unarmed man. Protests erupted nationwide, and the Department of Justice launched an investigation alongside state authorities. In May 2017, Slager pleaded guilty, admitting that his use of deadly force was unreasonable. That December, a judge ruled that his actions amounted to second-degree murder and sentenced him to 20 years in prison, one of the longest sentences ever given to a police officer for an on-duty killing. The city of North Charleston later reached a $6.5 million civil settlement with Walter's family. His mother, Judy Scott, spoke publicly about forgiveness, saying she hoped her son's death would bring change. The case spurred new legislation in South Carolina, requiring police to wear body cameras, and became a landmark moment in the national movement for police reform. Walter Scott's death remains one of the clearest examples of how ordinary encounters can turn fatal when fear and bias replace judgment. He was unarmed, fleeing, and posed no threat. 8 bullets ended his life, but the video that exposed the truth helped shift the national conversation about accountability, justice, and the value of a single human life. On the evening of July 6, 2016, in Falcon Heights, Minnesota, 32-year-old Philando Castile was pulled over by police while driving with his girlfriend and her young daughter. What began as a routine traffic stop ended in tragedy, becoming one of the most widely seen and devastating examples of fatal police violence in recent American history. The encounter lasted less than a minute but changed national conversations for years to come. Philando Duval Castile was born on July 16, 1983 in St. Louis, Missouri, and grew up in Minnesota. After graduating from St. Paul Central High School, he worked for the St. Paul Public Schools District for more than a decade, most recently as a cafeteria supervisor at J.J. Hill Montessori Magnet School. Children affectionately called him Mr. Phil, and parents praised his kindness and professionalism. He had no criminal record beyond minor traffic violations and was known as a careful, responsible man who avoided conflict. The officer who stopped him that night, Geronimo Yanez, was a 4-year veteran of the St. Anthony Police Department, partnered with Officer Joseph Kauser. The stop took place around 9 p.m. near Larpenteur Avenue. Yanez later stated that he pulled the car over because it matched the description of one linked to a recent armed robbery, though Castile's vehicle was not confirmed to be involved. Dashcam footage later revealed that Castile had been cooperative and calm throughout the stop. Philando informed Yanez that he had a licensed firearm and permit to carry, in accordance with Minnesota law, and assured the officer he was not reaching for it. Seconds later, Yanez fired 7 rounds into the car at close range. Philando was struck 5 times. His girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, and her 4-year-old daughter were seated beside and behind him, witnessing everything. In shock and desperation, Reynolds began live-streaming the aftermath on Facebook, showing Castile bleeding heavily as Yanez continued shouting commands. Philando was taken to Hennepin County Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner determined that he had died of multiple gunshot wounds. His death sparked immediate outrage and grief across the United States. Vigils and protests spread from Minnesota to major cities nationwide, as many saw the shooting as another example of an unarmed black man killed during an encounter that should have remained routine. Within days, Officer Yanez was placed on administrative leave, and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension opened an investigation. In November 2016, Ramsey County Attorney John Choi charged Yanez with second-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Yanez had acted recklessly and without reason to fear for his life, while the defense maintained that the officer believed he was in imminent danger. In June 2017, a jury acquitted Yanez of all charges after 5 days of deliberation. The verdict provoked renewed protests and widespread frustration. Within hours, the city of St. Anthony announced that Yanez would be dismissed from the police department. stating he would no longer serve in a field where he would be required to carry a firearm. Philando Castile's family later reached a $3.8 million settlement with the city. In his memory, colleagues and parents from J.J. Hill Montessori established scholarships and meal funds to honor his care for the children he served. His death also prompted legislative discussions in Minnesota regarding police training, traffic stop procedures, and the use of body cameras. Philando Castile's killing remains one of the clearest examples of how fear and perception can turn an ordinary encounter into irreversible tragedy. He was courteous, compliant, and law-abiding, yet he lost his life within seconds. His death, captured and shared across the world, forced a nation to once again confront the deadly consequences of racial bias and the urgent need for reform in American policing.